You've seen his tweets, you've heard him on the pod waves, and he's shown us the power of applying data science to activism. Joining us now is Sam Sinyangwe, activist and co-founder of We the Protesters.
Hey. So my name is Sam Sinyangwe, co-founder of We the Protesters. And I want to take you back to August 9th, 2014. That's the day Mike Brown was shot and killed by the Ferguson Police Department. His death sparked a wave of protests, a movement that has reverberated to this day and changed the national conversation about race, racism, and police violence. But in those early days and weeks and months of that emerging movement, as communities and activists took to the street demanding justice and accountability for police violence, what we heard from policymakers and from academics and from police chiefs was skepticism. They didn't believe this was a real problem, or they weren't ready to accept it. And so what they said was, we simply don't know whether police violence is a systemic issue. We simply don't have the facts, we don't have the data to make a judgment on whether we should respond to this crisis. Now, the reason that data wasn't available was of no fault to community members. The federal government had refused to collect comprehensive data on people killed by police. Even to this day, they do not have a comprehensive publicly reported data set of people killed by police. They could tell you how much rainfall there was in rural Missouri going back 200 years. They could not tell you how many people the police had killed last year or the year before. And so I was actually working at a nonprofit in Oakland at the time doing research and data science into effective solutions to issues of concentrated poverty and racial inequality. And I decided to connect with activists and organizers on the ground in Ferguson, and together we built the most comprehensive database of people killed by police in the United States called Mapping Police Violence. And what we found was that the numbers that we had seen to date on police violence had so vastly underestimated the crisis, and that in fact there are about 1,200 people killed by police every single year in this country, between 3 and 4 people every day. What that means is that 1 in 3 people killed by a stranger in this country is killed by a police officer. But we went a step further. Understanding the data, we started to parse the data by race and by place, and what we found was that rates of police violence varied tremendously depending on which city or state you were in. In some cities, there were extraordinarily high rates of police violence, places like Oklahoma City and Bakersfield and St. Louis. In St. Louis, a black man is twice as likely to be killed by a police officer as the average American is to be killed by anyone, civilian or police, twice as high as the US murder rate. But there were also cities in which there were much lower rates of police violence, places like Buffalo, New York, and New York City. And in Irvine, California, going all the way back in our data set over 5 years, police hadn't killed anyone. So we started to ask questions about what was going on in some of these jurisdictions that had the lowest rates of police violence that we could learn from, that we could scale, and launched a policy solutions platform called Campaign Zero that included a 10-point agenda of evidence-based, data-driven policies to end police violence in the United States. Now, we've been in rooms with policymakers and politicians, helped to shape the President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders' racial justice and policing agendas during their 2016 campaigns. We've met with police chiefs across the country and city council members and state legislators and have changed policies for the better. But we're only one organization, one startup. We can't be in every room, nor should we be. There are over 18,000 police jurisdictions in the United States, each with their own leadership, their set of policies and practices, and their own data identifying what some of the key issues are. And so we tried to think about how do we use technology to scale this effort? How do we use technology to make sure every single person in every single community has access to the data and the tools and the platforms that will allow them to be just as effective in changing policy in those rooms as any advocate who's been doing this work for quite some time? So the first thing that we launched was this survey. The survey platform was quite simple. It asked people what type of work they wanted to do. Did they want to help collect data? Did they want to help review policies and practices? Did they want to attend protests and marches? It asked them how many hours a week they have to contribute to the work and a little bit about their backgrounds. You know, were they a data scientist? Were they a designer or a developer? Were they new to this work and wanted to figure out how to get involved? And we had 18,000 people sign up in just 2 weeks to get involved from across the country. So much so we had to stop advertising it because we had this massive CSV file of all of this information, people who wanted to sign up and get involved, and I'm betting every single person wanted to get an answer and an immediate thing that they could do within 24 hours. So this is the initial base of folks that we were able to recruit in this effort. The data analysis that we did were people who actually signed up that had not done work in policing before, but we were able to train in how to use data in a different way. The designing and the development of the digital, the data visualizations, the maps, the tools, and the platforms were all volunteers who signed up from across the country looking for a way to get involved. But we took it a step further. Working with these designers and developers, we built this tool that simplifies the process of engaging your elected officials at every level of government and demanding they take action to address police violence. Using this tool, you enter your zip code, and immediately see who your local, state, and federal elected officials are, what bills they're currently considering that relate to the issue of police violence, what votes they've taken on the past on this issue, and then allows you to contact them. The whole process in 3 clicks or less. By simplifying this process of advocating to your elected officials, we've had over 100,000 people use this tool to contact their elected officials and demand change. And this has actually delivered some results. Working with folks across the country to track legislation in every single state over the past several years related to the issue of police violence and police reform, what we found is that there have actually been 105 laws signed across the United States since the Ferguson Uprising began to address the issue of police violence. The majority of states have signed into law at least some measure of police reform. Now, this looks good, but it's not nearly enough. Because we know we need a comprehensive solution to this issue. Just merely collecting better data or having better use of force policies is only a part of the solution if you don't have the enforcement and accountability structures in place to make sure that those new rules are enforced. But where we're seeing progress being made, where we're seeing cities and states enacting legislation as a direct consequence of this organizing and activism, we're seeing results. In cities that have changed their use of force policies in response to advocacy from community organizers, we're seeing significantly fewer police shootings the year after implementation of those changes. These are lives saved as a direct consequence of that organizing. But that's just the beginning. There are 104 million Americans, according to Pew Research surveys, who support the Black Lives Matter movement. 104 million. Now, there were 60 million people who voted for Trump, 63 million people who voted for Hillary Clinton. This is 104 million people, but at best, only a tiny fraction of that many people are actively engaged in the work. Our goal is to close that gap. If we can develop tools and technologies that can effectively reach millions of people and give them pathways into the work of organizing and creating systemic change, that's where we can get to transformational results. It should be as simple as taking out your phone, putting in your zip code, the issues you're interested in getting involved on, a little bit about your background and what you want to do and how many hours a week you have to get involved, and being connected immediately to tasks and action items that you can do right away to make the biggest impact according to the data and the evidence-based practice on ending police violence in the United States. That's the platform that we're building. And so I encourage you to reach out and get involved. I'll be around after this event. Because together we can build platforms that effectively empower people at scale to deliver transformational change and save lives in this country. Together we can scale and sustain this movement for years to come. And so I invite you to join us at joincampaignzero.org, and together we can build a future in which Black Lives Matter. Thank you.